What price does one pay for choosing to parley with the victor, rather than die in formation with the vanquished? In the spring of 479 BC, this question hung over every Greek polis, not as a rhetorical exercise, but as a death sentence. The Persian army was stationed in Thessaly. Xerxes had retreated east following his naval defeat at Salamis, but he had left behind something far more formidable than himself: Mardonius. The king's nephew, the very general who had championed this invasion before the royal council. Herodotus writes plainly, "It was Mardonius who convinced Xerxes to wage war on Greece." Now he was here, commanding an elite army of nearly 300,000 men, if Greek sources are to be believed, or a significantly smaller, yet still overwhelming force, according to modern historians. The exact numbers remain a mystery. The scale, however, was undeniable. Mardonius was not leaving. He was waiting. He spent the winter in Thessaly, replenishing his stores, regrouping his cavalry, and establishing supply lines. This was no retreat. It was the pause before the strike. And while he waited, Hellas demonstrated exactly what it was capable of in a crisis. The polis haggled, traded accusations, and sought any exit strategy that served their narrow interests. Athens lay in ashes, for the second time in 2 years. The Persians had swept through the city, leveling temples and homes alike. The population had fled to Salamis before the army even arrived. 140,000 people were left without shelter, without food, and without a future, so long as Mardonius remained in Greece. This was no metaphor for vulnerability. It was a literal fact. The preeminent polis of Hellas had ceased to exist as a physical place. It was then that envoys arrived to meet with the Athenian strategists. Mardonius offered peace. The terms, by the standards of conquerors, were almost generous. Autonomy, the restoration of temples at the expense of the Persian treasury, and incorporation into the Achaemenid Empire as a privileged ally. Alexander I, king of Macedon, personally delivered the offer. Herodotus calls him a proxenos and benefactor of the Athenians, a man straddling two worlds, simultaneously a vassal of Persia and a formal friend of Athens. The Athenian elite listened. This was not a failure of spirit, but cold arithmetic. Sparta was busy fortifying the isthmus, building a transverse rampart across the Isthmus of Corinth. Their purpose was simple: seal off the Peloponnese and abandon everything north of it. Forget Attica, forget Athens, forget 140,000 refugees. The Spartans called it strategic necessity. The Athenians called it what it was: the abandonment of allies. While the stones were being laid at the isthmus, Mardonius's envoys waited for an answer. Spartan diplomacy reacted with its predictable lethargy. Eventually, a Spartan embassy arrived in Athens, pleading with them not to yield. They promised to feed the Athenian refugees at Sparta's expense until the war's end. Herodotus records the Athenian assembly's defiant reply to Mardonius: "As long as the sun runs its course, we will never make peace with Xerxes." It was a beautiful sentiment, but Herodotus immediately follows it with a telling detail. The Athenians delivered this answer while pointedly looking at the Spartan envoys standing nearby. The words were spoken for an audience. Mardonius received his refusal. He burned Athens a second time, razing the little that had survived his first visit, and marched his army into Boeotia. Boeotia greeted him with bread and alliance. Thebes, the region's capital, opened its gates without a fight. The Theban aristocracy had bet on Persia a year earlier, a collaboration known as Medism, and now provided the Persians with a base of operations, provisions, and intelligence on Greek positions. Mardonius established his camp on the banks of the Asopus River. The plain before him was wide and open, ideal terrain for cavalry. He chose this ground by design. Now Greece would have to come to him, or admit defeat without striking a blow. The question was whether they would arrive as a unified formation or as a fractured collection of feuding delegations, spears at the ready. Mardonius stood on the banks of the Asopus and waited. When Greece finally moved to meet him, the manner of their arrival revealed more about the Greeks than any battle ever could. Athens sent a delegation to Sparta. It was not a request, but an ultimatum. The strategos Aristides and several archons arrived in Lacedaemon and spoke bluntly. If Sparta did not march out from behind its wall at the Isthmus, Athens would accept Mardonius's terms. Not out of love for Persia, but out of necessity. The Athenians had no city, no fleet to support them on land, and no future without an ally who was actually willing to fight rather than pile stones in the rear. Sparta heard this and hesitated for 5 days. Herodotus records this pause without comment, but it speaks for itself. On the 6th day, the ephors announced their decision. The army had already marched. 5,000 Spartiates, full citizens, accompanied by 35,000 Helot hoplites, had left Lacedaemon before the Athenian embassy could even receive an official answer. The regent Pausanias had led the army out in secret, under the cover of night, bypassing formal ceremonies. This was not magnanimity, it was reputation management. Pausanias was a man without personal military glory. He was the regent for the underage son of Leonidas, who had fallen at Thermopylae. Every decision he made would be measured against his uncle's legend, a pressure he could never fully escape. Contingents from across the Peloponnese joined him: Corinthians, Sicyonians, Tegeans, and Phaeacians. Then came the Athenians, 8,000 hoplites under the command of Aristides, followed by smaller allies. When the host finally gathered at Eleusis and began its march north, it comprised, by various estimates, between 70 and 110,000 men, including armed attendants. This was the largest land army the Greek polis had ever fielded together. Its mere existence was a political miracle, for until the final week, no one was certain it would assemble at all. The army entered Boeotia through the mountain passes of Kithaeron and descended onto the plain north of Plataea. There, they faced their first encounter with reality. The Persian cavalry appeared immediately. Mardonius did not wait for the Greeks to entrench. Numidian and Bactrian horsemen harassed the vanguard while it was still on the march, peppering the column with javelins and withdrawing before the heavy infantry could deploy. One of the first to fall was Mecistius, commander of the Persian cavalry. His horse took an arrow and threw its rider. Weighed down by heavy scale armor, Mecistius could not rise quickly enough. The Athenians finished him on foot. Herodotus writes that the Persians, upon learning of his death, cut their hair in mourning, both for themselves and their horses. The Greeks displayed his body, parading it on a cart along the ranks to bolster morale. It was a small victory, but the enemy had already taught them a lesson. On the open plain, Mardonius's cavalry controlled the space. The Greek phalanx could not catch them, nor could it stop them. It could only endure the attacks and wait. The Greeks took up positions on the slopes of Kithaeron, overlooking the plain. It was a sound tactical choice. Cavalry does not charge uphill. Mardonius remained camped by the Asopus, a few kilometers to the north. Between the two armies lay open ground, and neither side was in a hurry to cross it. It was then that the Boeotian problem began to manifest. Thebes was feeding the Persian camp. Roads from Boeotia brought grain, livestock, and fodder directly to Mardonius's tents. Theban aristocrats sat in the Persian councils of war. Herodotus names them Timigenides and Atigenus, men whom Greece would later hunt as war criminals. For now, they guided the Persian commanders, pointing out the weak points in the Greek supply lines and the unguarded trails through Kithairon. The Persians exploited this intelligence. A detachment of Persian cavalry intercepted a Greek supply train in one of the passes. 500 pack animals carrying grain, oil, and wine were slaughtered or captured. The column never reached the camp. It was not yet a catastrophe, but an army of 100,000 men consumes supplies faster than they can be replenished. Every intercepted convoy brought the Greeks closer to the moment when standing still would become impossible. Rumors rippled through the Greek camps. They said Mardonius was preparing a night assault. They said the Boeotians had handed the Persians a map of the Greek positions. They said several small poleis had already sent secret envoys to the Persians to negotiate. Pausanias held his position, but time was his enemy. The army stood idle. The cavalry pressed. Supply trains burned in the passes. And the only reliable source of water for the entire Greek host, the Gargaphia spring at the foot of the hills, became more vital with each passing hour. Gargaphia was a mere spring at the base of Kithairon. Neither river nor lake, it was a narrow vein of water sufficient for a village, but not for an army. 100,000 men and thousands of horses depended on this single source. The Asopus River was closer and more plentiful, but it was under the constant watch of Persian archers. To fetch water there was to invite a hail of arrows. Mardonius knew this. The Persian cavalry began systematic raids on Gargaphia. It was not a single attack, but a relentless series. Day after day, horsemen rode into the spring, trampling it, stirring up mud, and fouling the water with debris. Herodotus describes this briefly, but the consequences were dire. The water became undrinkable. Greek water carriers returned to camp with empty amphorae, or did not return at all. A hoplite from the Athenian contingent, his name lost to history, stood at the edge of the spring and stared at the fouled water. Nearby lay a fallen comrade. They had come for water together. Only one would return, and with nothing to show for it. This was the final crisis in a convergence of failures. For days, the Persian cavalry had blocked the passes of Kithairon. The Greek supply lines were severed. The army was eating its final reserves. There was grain, but it required water to cook. There was meat, but it required preparation. The Greek cavalry horses were drinking the last of the water brought in canteens. The august heat of Boeotia was suffocating. Armor baked in the sun until the bronze was hot enough to sear the skin. Mardonius did not need to storm the heights. He simply watched the clock and counted the days. The Persian cavalry operated with a precision modern historians would call logistical strangulation. They targeted water carriers, intercepted supply trains, and maintained constant pressure on the flanks to deny the Greeks any rest. No single strike was decisive, but together they formed a tightening vice. The commanders of the Greek contingents gathered for a council of war. The situation was laid bare. There was no water, food would last only a few more days, Gargaphia was poisoned, and the Asopus was unreachable. Pausanias listened to the reports. According to Herodotus, it was then that the word retreat was first spoken, not as a command, but as an unavoidable reality. The decision was made. They would withdraw under the cover of night to the island, a strip of land between two branches of the Ouro River, a few kilometers to the south, near the walls of Plataea. There, they would find water and protected flanks. There, they could regroup and re-establish their supply lines. It was a logical plan, perhaps the only one left. But as the council met, The Persian cavalry conducted one final raid on Gargaphia. This time, they did more than stir the mud. They choked the spring with stones and earth. Greek sentries opened fire, and several Persians were unhorsed, but the rest withdrew. The spring was gone. Herodotus does not dramatize the moment. He simply states that the Gargaphia spring was blocked by Persian cavalry, leaving the Greek army without water. One sentence, but behind it stood an army of 100,000 men under the august sun, their time finally running out. Pausanias issued the final order. The withdrawal would begin during the third watch of the night, roughly midnight. Darkness would shield their movements from Persian scouts. By dawn, the army had to occupy the new positions at the island and secure the water before Mardonius realized they had moved. The plan demanded three things: silence, speed, and unity of command. That night, the Greek army would possess none of the three. As the commanders returned to their camps to prepare, a Theban informant in the Persian camp, Herodotus notes the constant flow of intelligence, notified Mardonius of the Greeks' desperate condition. He did not yet know of the retreat, but he knew of the water and the failing morale. He knew the Greeks were at their breaking point. Mardonius listened to the report and summoned his generals. According to Herodotus, that night he uttered words that would prove prophetic in the most ironic sense. "These Greeks are fleeing. We will catch them tomorrow." Thirst had become an invisible noose around the Greek army's throat. In the sweltering camp, the Spartan commander looked at that noose and realized the only way out was to step into the darkness. In the heat-choked camp, Pausanias gave the signal. Third watch. Rise without a sound. The army was to move in 3 columns. The Athenians would withdraw west across the plain. The Spartans and Tegeans would fall back along the slopes of Kithairon to the south, and the allied contingents in the center would move directly toward Plataea. All 3 were to converge at the island before daybreak. The order was clear. The execution was a disaster. The Athenians moved first. Their commanders knew that a night march across a plain patrolled by Persian cavalry was a lethal gamble, but they had no choice. The columns slipped into the darkness in silence, without torches, navigating by the stars and the looming silhouette of Kithairon. The central contingents, Corinthians, Megarians, and Phliasians, rose and began their march, but order quickly dissolved. Different commanders, varying paces, and conflicting interpretations of the route led to chaos. Part of the column bypassed the island entirely, heading straight for the walls of Plataea. Herodotus records this without judgment, but with clinical precision. They pitched camp near the Temple of Hera, far from their designated positions. They simply stopped, in the dark, in a foreign place. On the right flank, with the Spartans, a true crisis erupted. The Lokagos Amompharitus, commanding a Spartan unit, refused the order to retreat. He did not hesitate or ask for clarification. He simply refused. Herodotus captures his words almost verbatim. A Spartan does not flee from barbarians, nor does he disgrace his city. He heaved a massive stone from the earth and dropped it at Pausanias' feet, the traditional way of casting a vote against a decision in a Spartan council. Pausanias was trapped. To abandon Amompharatus was to leave a unit to be slaughtered. To wait for him was to face the dawn in the open, caught between the old lines and the new, exposed on all sides. He waited. The argument raged for over an hour. Pausanias pleaded. Amompharatus remained immovable. Other Spartan commanders pressured the stubborn officer, but he stood his ground, literally, beside his stone. Herodotus writes that Pausanias eventually turned and began moving the main column forward, hoping Amompharatus would follow rather than be left alone. The calculation was correct, but the cost was 2 critical hours of darkness. The first light of dawn touched the east while the Spartan column was still in transit. Amompharatus finally relented, moving his unit last to serve as the rear guard. In a sense, he got what he wanted. He was not fleeing, but withdrawing with his weapons in hand, facing the enemy. In reality, his obstinacy had endangered the entire army. Dawn found the Greek host shattered into 3 isolated pieces. The Athenians were on the plain to the west, nearing the island, but separated from the Spartans by a ridge of hills and several kilometers of open ground. The central contingents were huddled near the Temple of Hera, nowhere near their objective. The Spartans and Tegeans were still on the slopes of Kithairon, mid-March, their flanks exposed, with Amompharatus's rear guard only just beginning to move. The 3 divisions could not see one another, could not hear one another, and could not support one another. At first light, Persian scouts looked upon the empty Greek lines. Then, they spotted movement on the slopes. The Persian camp erupted. Riders galloped to Mardonius's tent with the news. Herodotus writes that the Thebans at headquarters immediately framed the scene. The Greeks were retreating in cowardice and must be pursued. Mardonius emerged from his tent, looked toward the hills, and saw the retreating columns. He smiled, or so Herodotus implies. The Persian cavalry surged forward from a standstill, thundering toward the hills where Amompharatus's rear guard was still visible. Simultaneously, the Theban cavalry, the Boeotians fighting for the great king, wheeled toward the Athenian column on the plain. A Spartan hoplite in the rear guard heard the growing roar of hooves before he saw the riders. The vibration traveled through the earth and into the soles of his sandals. He looked back. The main column was gone. Ahead lay only the slope and the morning mist clinging to the valley. Behind him came the Persians. Amompharatus formed his unit, shields up, spears leveled. They are not running. This is the moment the stubborn fool had been aiming for all night. He finally got his battle. Only it didn't begin where, when, or with the forces Pausanias had counted on. The darkness of night, which was supposed to save the army, turned against it. 3 scattered columns at dawn do not constitute a retreat. They are 3 separate targets for an enemy who was merely waiting for an excuse to strike. Mardonius got his excuse. Mardonius got his excuse. And he took advantage of it immediately, precisely as he shouldn't have. From the plain, the Persian commander sees what looks like a disorderly rout. The Greek positions are empty. The columns are moving in disarray. Amompharatus's rear guard is isolated on the slope, cut off from the main force. To a man who had waited 9 days for the enemy to make a mistake, the scene is unmistakable. The Greeks have broken. The Greeks are running. This is not analysis. This is wishful thinking mistaken for reality. Herodotus writes that Mardonius addresses his men at this moment. He tells them that these vaunted Spartans are fleeing, abandoning their weapons, and that today the Persian army will prove that the glory of Lacedaemon is an empty sound. The words are precise. The mood in the Persian camp is belligerent. 9 days of stalemate, cavalry raids, and logistical pressure, and finally, the enemy has faltered. Mardonius gives the order for a general advance. The Persian infantry fords the Asopus. Thousands of men enter the water. The river is shallow, barely waist-deep in summer, and move toward the southern bank. The cavalry has already surged ahead. Behind them, the main mass of the army deploys. Medes, Bactrians, Indians, and Sakai. The Greek allies of the Persians, The Thebans and other Boeotians hold the left flank opposite the Athenians on the plain. Amompharatus's column is the first to come under attack. Persian horsemen surround the rearguard on the slope. They do not attack head-on. Cavalry does not charge a shielded phalanx directly. They halt at bowshot range and begin to loose. The Spartans close ranks. Their wooden shields, faced with bronze, take the brunt of the arrows. Some pierce the leather lining, others find gaps between the shields. Men fall silently. Spartan discipline forbids crying out in pain while in formation. Amompharatus holds his position. But he understands, without the main force, the rearguard will not hold. On the hills, Pausanias hears the din of battle behind him. He halts the column. He turns the Spartans and Tegeans back, toward the rearguard. This decision will save Amompharatus, but it also means the Spartan army is engaging in battle on the slopes of Kithairon, far from their chosen position, without water, without supplies, and without contact with the Athenians. Mardonius does not know this, or he doesn't want to know. The Persian infantry reaches the southern bank of the Asopus and deploys into battle formation. In front is a wall of wicker shields called gerha. This is standard Persian doctrine. Archers stand behind the gerha, utilizing them as mobile cover, and maintain continuous volleys until the enemy breaks or comes close enough for hand-to-hand combat. Against scattered, demoralized infantry, it is a lethal, unfailing tactic. Against a solid Spartan phalanx, no one has tested it yet. Arrows fly thick. Herodotus describes the Persian barrage at Plataea as continuous, clouds of arrows obscuring the sky. This is no chronicler's metaphor. A Persian archer could lose 6 to 8 arrows per minute. 10,000 archers means 60 to 80,000 arrows per minute raining down on the Spartan position. The Spartans stand. They do not respond. The hoplites have no bows. Their javelins are held only by the front ranks, and those have already been expended. The phalanx's only weapons are the spear in close combat and the tight formation that absorbs the shock. But the tight formation provides no protection from above. Arrows fall in a high arc. They find the shoulders, legs, and faces of men in the second and third ranks where the shields cannot cover. Men fall. The formation closes over the fallen. Pausanias orders them to wait for omens. The priests cut open the sacrificial animals and read their entrails. The omens are unfavorable. They cannot attack. Pausanias waits for the next sacrifice. Again, unfavorable. The Spartan commander stands under a hail of arrows, looking at the priest with bloody hands, waiting for the gods to grant permission. From the outside, it looks like paralysis. Within the Spartan command, it is a protocol 3 centuries old, and deviation is not permitted. The Tegeans stand beside them. They are allies of the Spartans, an Arcadian tribe whose phalanx is little inferior to the Lacedaemonians. They also wait. They also endure the arrows. Mardonius sees that the Greeks are not attacking. This bolsters his confidence. In his worldview, the enemy is demoralized, driven into the hills, and deprived of water and supplies. A little more pressure, and the formation will crumble on its own. He intensifies the barrage. The cavalry continues to harass the flanks. The infantry presses from the front behind the wall of Gera. The Persian machine works methodically. Every element is in its place. The commander controls the field. But Mardonius made a mistake earlier, at the moment he gave the order to advance. He attacked not because analysis showed the enemy's weakness, but because he had waited 9 days and could wait no longer. because his Boeotian allies were urging him on, because the Greek retreat looked like a rout, and the moment seemed perfect. The perfect moment is the worst advisor a commander can have. The Spartans stand under the arrows. The priest cuts open another animal. Pausanias looks at the entrails and waits for a sign. Men fall to his right and left. One of the fallen, a Spartiate whose name Herodotus does not preserve, manages to drive his spear into the ground before losing consciousness. The spear stands vertically above him, like a marker. A sign will come, but first, the Spartans will lose many more men. The spear stands above the fallen Spartiate. The formation has closed over him. The living stand where the dead once stood. The barrage continues. Herodotus does not count the minutes, but modern historians, reconstructing the battle's chronology, estimate this period of waiting lasted several hours. Several hours under a continuous rain of arrows. Without the ability to respond. Without an order to attack. Without water. The Gargaphia spring had been cut off the day before. A Spartan hoplite in the third rank hears a thud against his neighbor's shield, then a short exhale, then silence. He does not turn around. Regulations forbid it. The formation has closed, meaning the gap is filled. By whom? He will find out after the battle, if he survives. This is not fear.
It is worse than fear.
It is an anticipation in which a man remains conscious, in full control of himself, yet absolutely helpless. Pausanias prays. Herodotus recounts this moment with a rare level of detail. The Spartan regent stands facing the temple of Hera of Plataea and prays aloud in full view of the army, asking the goddess not to allow the Greeks to perish. This is a public ritual intended for the soldiers as much as for the gods. A commander who prays in full view of his army under fire is a commander who has not lost his nerve. This is vital. The priests cut open the next animal. The entrails are red again. This time, favorable. What exactly changed in the anatomy of the sacrificial ram between the previous sacrifice and this one is a question the sources do not answer. But the consequences are immediate. Pausanias turns to the Tegeans. The Tegean strategos, Philocritus, does not wait for further words. His men are already gripping their spears. The Tegeans are the first to break from their position. The Spartans follow them. But before we analyze this moment, we must record what was happening within the formation during those hours. Because here lies the key to understanding the entire battle. The Persian barrage tactic was calculated for a specific enemy reaction. Under a hail of arrows, infantry does one of two things. They either flee or they attack. Flight is ideal for Persian archers. Men expose their backs, the formation breaks, and cavalry finishes off the survivors. An attack is also acceptable. The enemy runs toward you, you keep shooting until the last moment, then retreat behind the spearmen. The Spartans did neither. They stood, for hours, under fire, without responding and without retreating. No army the Persians had encountered before had ever done anything like this. The Scythians would retreat into the steppe. The Egyptians would break and flee. The Ionian Greeks, those fighting on the Persian side, knew that under such a barrage they could not hold out for long. The Lacedaemonian phalanx held. This is not the mysticism of discipline. This is concrete military mechanics. The Spartan shield, the hoplon, roughly 80 centimeters in diameter and weighing about 8 kilograms, covered the body from chin to knees. The overlapping shields in the phalanx created a near-continuous wall. Arrows flying on a flat trajectory were caught by wood and bronze. The problem was the arcing arrows falling from above. They found the shoulders, feet, and exposed parts of helmets. It was from these that men fell. Slowly, one by one. A rank-and-file hoplite in this formation does not think about Mardonius's strategy or analyze the political situation in Hellas. He thinks about holding his shield at the correct angle, about not shifting his footing, about the man to his left who has shifted slightly, opening a gap that must be closed with his own body right now. This is the phalanx. Not heroism, but a precise physical task that must be solved every second. The Persian commanders observe the Greek formation and cannot understand why it is not breaking. Mardonius intensifies the barrage. According to Herodotus, the cavalry attacks the flanks again, not for a breakthrough, but to maintain pressure. Horsemen sweep in from the side, shower the outer ranks with javelins, and withdraw. They come again. The outer ranks lose men faster than the center. Pausanias stands in the midst of this. He prays. He waits for the priest. And then the omen is received. The Spartan formation begins to move. Not running, walking. The phalanx moves forward as only it can, as a single organism, where each man touches his neighbor's shoulder and steps in the same rhythm. Shields hold their angle. Spears are leveled. The tread of 8,000 men in bronze resonates through the ground with a low, rhythmic hum. The Tegeans advance to the left, pulling slightly ahead. The Persian archers behind the wall of Gera see the approaching phalanx and accelerate their rate of fire. Arrows fly thicker. Men in the front ranks of the Spartans fall. The formation closes. The pace does not slow. The distance between the phalanx and the wall of Persian shields shrinks. 200 paces, 150, 100. At 100 paces, an arrow still kills. At 50, there is almost no time for an aimed shot. At 30, the phalanx breaks into a run. The Persian Gera shields, wicker, light, and man height, are designed to stop a javelin or deflect an arrow. They are not designed to stop 8,000 men in bronze charging at full speed. The shields fall first. The Spartans prayed to their gods, standing under a hail of arrows without drawing their swords. And it was this endurance, not the fury of the attack, that shattered the Persian calculation. The shields fall. The phalanx crashes into the Persian formation. What happens in the next few minutes is not like a battle in the sense that commanders usually understand the word. There is no maneuver, no flanking movements, no tactics. There are two masses of men colliding on a narrow section of the slope, and the physics of this collision are merciless to the lighter of them. The Persian infantryman is armed with a short spear, a wicker shield, and leather or linen armor. He is a good soldier. Herodotus writes directly that the Persians fought bravely that day and were not inferior to the Greeks in personal courage. They held their formation behind the fallen Gera, grabbed Spartan spears with their bare hands, broke them, and tried to reach their opponents with swords. The problem was something else entirely. A Spartan hoplite weighs about 30 kilograms in his equipment. Bronze cuirass, bronze helmet, bronze greaves, an 8-kilogram shield, and a 2-meter spear. When this mass moves forward shoulder to shoulder with 7,000 others like it, the Persian formation cannot stop it. Physically, the Persian spear is shorter, the Persian shield is lighter, the Persian armor cannot withstand the blow of an 8-kilogram bronze shield, which a Spartan uses to strike at close range before thrusting with his spear. The Persian ranks buckle. Then they begin to disintegrate. It is here, in the thick of this collision, that Mardonius is located. The Persian commander fights mounted on a white horse, surrounded by an elite 1,000-man guard, the finest Persian warriors, whom Herodotus calls those who wear golden ornaments. Mardonius is not observing the battle from afar. He is in the heart of it. This is his style of command, and, as it will turn out, his fatal weakness. The white horse is visible from afar. The Spartans see it, the Tegeans see it. At some point, a group of warriors from Tegea, Herodotus does not name them, only their city, breaks through the Persian guard toward the white horse. The guard cuts them down. The Tegeans cut down the guard. Several men fall on both sides. Mardonius takes a hit. Herodotus writes briefly, "Mardonius was killed, and when he fell, his guard, the best of the Persians, was destroyed with him." Sources differ on the details. Who exactly delivered the fatal blow? Herodotus names the Spartan Mnestus. Other sources are silent or name different individuals. One thing is certain. Mardonius is dead. The white horse stands riderless, and the Persian army sees it. This is the moment after which everything changes. As long as Mardonius is alive, the Persian army has a center, a man who makes decisions, allocates reserves, and maintains the command hierarchy. The Persian military machine is complex and effective, but it requires management. Deprived of its head, it continues to move by inertia, but only by inertia. Mardonius's guard, having lost their commander, begins to retreat. Not flee, retreat, maintaining formation. These are professional soldiers, but their withdrawal exposes the flanks of neighboring units. They too begin to shift backward. The movement spreads along the Persian line like a crack in stone, slow at first, then accelerating. The Spartans press forward. The Tegeans on the left flank of the Spartan wedge have already broken through the Persian formation and are behind enemy lines. They turn and strike at the rear of those still holding. Persian units, attacked from front and rear simultaneously, lose their orientation. Herodotus records details that usually escape chroniclers who prefer to speak of the destinies of nations. Persian warriors at this moment grab Spartan spears with their bare hands, trying to deflect the blow. Their fingers are shattered. They do not let go. This is not cowardice on one side or fury on the other. It is the limit of what the human body can do when there is nowhere left to retreat. A Spartan hoplite in the front rank delivers a thrust, withdraws his spear, and takes a step forward. Thrust, withdraw, step. This is mechanics, honed by 1,000 hours on Spartan training fields. Now it functions as a tool, not as a surge of emotion. This is why the phalanx does not break when the enemy breaks. Mid-level Persian commanders try to halt the retreat. In some places it works, locally, for a few minutes. Herodotus mentions that individual Persian detachments turned and counterattacked several times. The Greeks fell back, then advanced again. This is not a clean victory from the first blow. This is work. But the balance has shifted irreversibly. Mardonius's guard has ceased to exist as a combat unit. Persian units without overall command act according to their own judgment. Some hold, some withdraw, some have already fled. There is no unity. And without unity, the Persian army loses its primary advantage, numerical superiority, which only functions with coordination. Ahead, several kilometers away, stands the Persian camp. Wooden fortifications erected at the beginning of the campaign. Behind them are supplies, treasures, and thousands of people from the baggage train, non-combatants, servants, and support staff. And it is there that the wave of the retreating Persian army is now surging. The Spartans follow it. Mardonius's white horse stands on the field without a rider. Around it are the bodies of the guard who died without retreating. Herodotus writes about this without pathos. They fought well. They were simply unlucky enough to be closest to the man who had to be killed. On the right flank, several kilometers to the west, the Athenians do not yet know that Mardonius is dead. They are occupied with their own battle, and it is fought quite differently. On the right flank, the Athenians face the Theban cavalry and Boeotian infantry. This is a different war. There are no Persians here. Here, Greeks are killing Greeks. Thebes had bet on Persia back in 480 BC. For 2 years, they supplied the Persian army, provided intelligence, and participated in Mardonius's council. The Theban aristocracy received real dividends from this alliance. Persian garrisons protected their power within Boeotia, trade routes remained open, and neighboring poleis that did not cooperate with the invader were forced into submission. Now the Thebans must defend this choice with arms. The Boeotian cavalry strikes the Athenians first. These are not the Persian tactics of javelins and retreat. The Theban horsemen charge straight ahead, heavy, aggressive, aiming to crush the Athenian line before the phalanx can close ranks. Several Athenian units on the far right flank take the hit and buckle. A gap opens. The Athenian general Aristides sees the breach and plugs it with reserves. The cavalry pulls back. They charge again. They pull back again. This continues until the Theban infantry advances. 3,000 Theban hoplites. These are the elite of Boeotia, well-armed and seasoned men. They form up against the Athenians and push forward. Herodotus records that the battle between the Athenians and Thebans was brutal. This is the only assessment he allows himself in describing this clash. Beyond that, almost nothing. But from what he does report, a picture can be reconstructed. An Athenian hoplite peers past the rim of his shield at the man opposite him. The Boeotian dialect, the same Greek tongue, merely a different accent, the same bronze helmet, the same spear, the same shield with the distinctive Boeotian device, the double-notched cutout, which Athenians had seen in the agora during times of peaceful trade. Now, that shield is closing in on him. Spears clash. Line presses against line. The Thebans fight stubbornly. Herodotus admits this plainly. They do not break at the first impact. The front ranks hold their ground. Casualties on both sides mount quickly. Hoplite combat on level ground without terrain advantages is decided by brute physics. Whose phalanx is deeper, whose rear ranks push harder. The Athenians are deeper. They have more men. Herodotus names the precise losses of the Theban elite. 300 men from the highest stratum of Theban society died in this battle. Exactly 300, a number that carries special weight in Greek military culture. 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. Now, 300 Theban aristocrats on the plain near Plataea. But these 300 died fighting for the Persian king against their own people. The Theban line begins to break. Not immediately. First, the Theban right flank gives way. The Athenian pressure there proved stronger. Then the right flank starts to drag the center back with it. Commanders try to hold the line with shouts. The line doesn't hold. Men turn. When the Theban infantry broke and ran, the cavalry followed. The Boeotian horsemen, who had just attacked the Athenian flank, wheeled their mounts and fled north, towards Thebes. This saved them from immediate annihilation. Herodotus writes that the Boeotian cavalry maintained enough order to withdraw in formation. The infantry did not. The infantry scattered and fled in every direction. The Athenians pursue, but not for long, because at this moment, news arrives from the west. The Spartans have broken the Persian center, Mardonius is dead, and the Persian army is retreating to its camp. Aristides halts the pursuit of the Thebans. There is a more important objective: the Persian camp. The Athenians turn and march north, towards where the remnants of the Persian army are massing behind wooden fortifications. The Spartans are already approaching the walls from the east. The central Greek contingents, who had held their position for most of the battle near the Temple of Hera, finally begin to move. The camp is surrounded. Inside the wooden walls are thousands of men. These are not just combat units. This is the entire Persian baggage train. Servants, scribes, grooms, treasurers, cooks, camp followers, and slaves. Among them are the demoralized remnants of combat units who have lost their commanders. The Persian general Artabazus, who commanded a separate corps and did not participate in Mardonius's attack, saw the battle's outcome from afar and immediately led his 40,000 men north, towards Phocis and further to the Hellespont. He did not stay to defend the camp. He left. This decision saved his men, and it left the camp without a significant portion of its defenders. Those who remained inside closed the gates and took up positions on the walls. Wooden walls are not a stone fortress, but they buy time and create an obstacle that a phalanx cannot overcome on its own. The Spartans were not masters of siegecraft. That was not their way of war. The Athenians were. Herodotus writes that the Athenians were the first to scale the ramparts. The Tegeans followed. Wooden sections are ripped away, planks splinter under the blows. The gates give way. A torrent of men in bronze, heated by hours of fighting, surges inside, with no order to show mercy and no reason to stop. The Theban aristocrats, who had betrayed Hellas, fled towards their own walls. But the fate of the men trapped in the Persian camp that day, that was the next bill Greece would present to the defeated empire. The gates fall. The Athenians enter first. Inside the wooden walls is no longer an army. The army is already dead on the slopes of Kithairon, or heading north with Artabazus. Inside is what remains of the imperial war machine after defeat. Thousands of men without command, without formation, without a plan. Persian warriors who have lost their commanders, logistics personnel, men who that morning still believed the Greeks were fleeing. They've massed in a far corner of the camp. Herodotus writes that the Persians tried to organize a defense inside, building barricades from bales and wagons, taking cover behind them with bows. The first Greeks to breach the gates were met with point-blank arrows. Several Athenians fell immediately at the entrance. This slowed the onslaught for a few minutes, no more. When the Tegeans and then elements of the Spartan army poured through the breach, the numerical advantage became absolute. Bales of hay do not withstand the impact of a phalanx. Wagons are overturned. The men behind them are exposed. Herodotus does not chronicle the events inside the camp with the same detail as he describes the maneuvers on the field. He simply states the result. Of the several 100,000 men in the Persian army that entered Greece, just over 3,000 survived that day, not counting Artabazus's corps, which had left before the assault. 3,000 out of many hundreds of thousands. Even if the initial strength of Mardonius's army was significantly less than Greek estimates, the ratio of killed to survivors speaks for itself. The camp is burning, not entirely, but pockets of it are already in flames. Sources do not state who set the fires. In the chaos of the assault, it could have been accidental, or it could have been a deliberate act by defenders trying to create a smokescreen. Fire spreads along the wooden sections of the walls and the roofs of supply tents. Part of what Mardonius brought with him from Persia perishes in this fire. But not all of it. Greek soldiers fall upon the treasures before the fire reaches them. The Persian military camp is not just a field station. It is the commander's mobile court, set up to imperial standards, tents of embroidered fabric, gold and silver vessels, furniture brought from Susa, stocks of minted coin to pay the army, personal effects of Mardonius and his commanders. Herodotus catalogues the spoils with the precision of an auditor: golden craters, silver bowls, couches with gold and silver legs, chests of clothing, and camels laden with provisions. Greek commanders try to establish control over the collection of trophies. A tenth of the spoils, by custom, goes to the gods, to Delphi, Olympia, and Athens. The rest is divided among the polis according to their contribution to the victory. This sounds orderly. In practice, a soldier who finds gold in a looted tent does not always wait for a commander to compile an inventory. Herodotus recounts a tale he deems credible, however improbable. Aeginetan merchants bought gold items from Spartan helots at the price of bronze, taking advantage of the fact that the helots didn't know the difference. The helots sold, the merchants got rich. This was a market that opened right on the ruins of the Persian camp, cold and instantaneous. Inside the camp, the Spartans find Mardonius's kitchen. This is not a metaphor or a literary device. Herodotus describes a specific scene. Tables are set in the Persian camp, laid for the meal of Mardonius and his commanders. Gold and silver dishes, prepared food, wine in craters. Persian cooks had been working that morning, unaware of how the day would end. Pausanias looks at this table. He then commands his own cooks to prepare a Spartan meal nearby for comparison. The Spartan meal is well known: the infamous black broth made from pig's blood, vinegar, and salt, accompanied by barley bread and water. Herodotus writes that Pausanias showed both tables to the assembled Greek commanders and said something to this effect: "Behold, Hellenes, the folly of the Persian. He who lived in such luxury came to rob us of our poverty." This is a good line, polished, calculated to be remembered and passed on. Herodotus remembered it. Among the trophies, they find the personal effects of the fallen Persian commanders. Mardonius's body itself has disappeared. Herodotus writes that it could not be found the next day. Someone among the Persians or their allies carried the body away during the chaos. Mardonius's grave remains unknown to this day. The Greeks tally their losses. 91 Spartans died, 16 Tegeans, 52 Athenians. Herodotus provides these figures with a precision that suggests they were taken from official lists compiled immediately after the battle. Less than 200 men on the Greek side, against tens of thousands on the Persian side. Such a disparity demands an explanation. Historians still debate it. Part of the explanation is that the Persian army suffered its main losses not in open battle, but during the assault on the camp, where the phalanx's advantage was absolute and there was nowhere to flee. Part of it is that Artabazus's corps left without a fight, saving the lives of 40,000 men who, in another situation, might have found themselves inside the wooden walls. By nightfall, the camp is silent. Greek units exit through the same gates they entered hours earlier. They carry trophies. Behind them, smoke rises over the smoldering tents. On the field before the camp lie bodies, too many to count quickly. Pausanias forbids the pursuit of the retreating forces. The official reason is army fatigue. The real reason is one that is not usually spoken aloud. The army is no longer in a state to move in an organized manner. It is occupied with other things. Everything that remains of the great Persian army in Europe now fits into Artabazus's column, heading north on the dusty road to the Hellespont. He is in a hurry. He understands what has happened, and he is the only Persian commander of that day who had the cold-headedness not to die with Mardonius's army. Behind him, Plataea. Ahead, a long road home and a conversation with King Xerxes about where 300,000 men have gone. Artabazus heads north. Behind him, Mardonius's camp burns. Ahead, the Hellespont, and a conversation he does not want. Pausanias stands in the pavilion of the slain Persian commander. Herodotus recounts this scene with the same meticulous detail with which he described the battle maneuvers. Mardonius's tent is not a military tent. It is a suite with carpets, embroidered curtains, gold dishes on a table, and a bed under a canopy. Pausanias looks at all this and orders Mardonius's cooks, those who survived, to prepare a Persian meal. Exactly what they would have prepared for their master today. The meal is prepared. Tables are set. Gold is arranged. Nearby, Spartan cooks place the black broth and barley bread. Pausanias surveys both tables and delivers his verdict on the avarice of a man who possessed all this, yet hungered for Spartan bread. The commanders laugh. The line will be remembered. Herodotus will record it. In 25 centuries, it will be quoted as an illustration of Spartan virtue. A decade later, the same Pausanias will be charged with Medizing, secretly negotiating with Persia. A few years after that, he will die of starvation, walled up alive in a temple in Sparta, after his own citizens seal the entrance when he seeks refuge at the altar. Herodotus does not write about this. These events will happen later. But the fact remains, the man who defeated Mardonius at Plataea will end his life in precisely this way. History does not preserve virtue. It preserves consequences. In the wake of Plataea, Greece experiences a brief moment of respite. Embassies travel from polis to polis. Common sacrifices are held in Delphi. Solemn oaths of eternal alliance are sworn. The Serpent Column, a bronze monument inscribed with the names of the victorious polis, is cast and placed in Delphi, where it will stand for centuries. Constantine the Great will later move it to Constantinople, where it stands to this day. The Eternal Alliance will last less than 30 years. Sparta does what it does best. It retreats into itself. The Peloponnesian League has fulfilled its task. The Persian threat is repelled, and the Peloponnese is safe. What happens north of the Isthmus interests Sparta only as much as it directly affects its interests, and direct interests are now at home. The Helots are always ready to take advantage of the absence of the Spartan army. This is not paranoia, it is experience. The Spartan army withdraws south. The Athenians return to their blackened city with Persian trophies and a concrete plan. Silver from the spoils will go towards building a fleet. The fleet will provide control of the Aegean Sea. Control of the sea will provide trade routes. Trade routes will provide money. Money will provide power. This is not speculative strategy. This is what the Athenian general Themistocles proposed even before the war, when he convinced the Athenians to spend the revenues from the Laurian silver mines on building 200 triremes. It was this fleet that won Salamis. Now the Persian trophies fit into the same logic. Athens begins to rebuild, rapidly, utilitarian, and with singular purpose. Walls are erected from the rubble of old buildings and gravestones. Thucydides, who will describe this construction later, will note that worked stones from gravestones were visible in the Athenian walls for a long time. The dead literally became the foundation of the new city. The Thebans are brought to account. The Greek League demands a trial for those who collaborated with the Persians. Thebes hands over several leaders, including Timogenides, whom Herodotus called one of the main organizers of Persian collaboration. Antigonus flees. His children are captured and brought to Pausanias. Pausanias releases them. They are not responsible for their father's choice. This is unexpected from a victor who has just defeated the largest army ever to invade Europe. The Greek League, so formidable in the face of a common threat, begins to fall apart as soon as that threat disappears. Sparta views the burgeoning Athenian hegemony in the Aegean with mounting apprehension. Athens looks at Spartan claims to leadership in Hellas with growing irritation. Corinth counts its money and weighs which side is more advantageous. The Boeotian polis, those that survived, quietly reorganize under the new reality. The Persian threat closes the path to Europe for the Achaemenid Empire forever. Xerxes will never again attempt to repeat the invasion. His successors will fight the Greeks differently, with money, bribery, and supporting one polis against another. This will prove significantly more effective than armies. Yet a storm is gathering within Hellas that will be worse than the Persian invasion. The Peloponnesian War looms just 30 years away. Sparta versus Athens. The same polis that stood shoulder to shoulder at Plataea will systematically destroy each other for 27 years. More Greeks will die than in any Persian campaign. Athens will lose its fleet, its empire, and its democracy. Temporarily, but humiliatingly. Sparta will exhaust itself to such an extent that half a century after its greatest triumph, it will lose a single battle at Leuctra and never regain its former position. The alliance that saved Western civilization from Persian rule did not survive its own success. The Serpent Column at Delphi bore the names of 31 Greek polis that fought against Persia. That is almost all that remains of that alliance. Metal with names. The Plataean Oath, by which the polis promised never to wage war against each other, was broken before a single generation had passed. Amidst the gore-drenched fields of Boeotia, where thousands still lie unburied, one thing is already clear. The victory at Plataea settled the question of the Persian invasion. It did not settle any of the questions that divided the Greeks among themselves. These questions did not disappear. They simply waited until the common enemy was gone. And now, he is gone. The salvation of the West was paid for with the blood of men who returned home and, 30 years later, shed that blood on each other. Tell me, looking at the fields of Boeotia, would you have bowed before the great king, trying to bargain for a comfortable life on Persian terms? Or would you have preferred to stand in the phalanx line, knowing that the allies behind you were already calculating what it would cost them after the victory? History leaves no third option. It never has.